So when it comes to making the Cici skirt, this could not be an easier thing to make. It's literally a 2-pattern piece design. Obviously you'll be reusing the big panel, so when you look at your pattern, you trace off the skirt in your size, you're actually going to need 4 of those, okay? So you're going to want 1 for each side of the front, and then you're going to have 2 sewn together. Now if you do have an extremely wide fabric and you can place that on the fold so you don't have a back seam, that's great. With the fabric that I'm about to use, I will be needing to cut 4 of these. So what I've done is I've doubled my fabric so that I can cut 2 at a time, and then I've left my edge section so that I can use that for things like headbands and any other sewing projects that I might have. So that will go in my fabric drawer for something else at a later date. So when laying out your Cici skirt, just make sure obviously that you're aware of any designs, any patterns on the fabric. So making sure that the top of your skirt is, with it being a rectangle, just making sure that the top of the skirt is at the top of the fabric and that it's not one of the side seams, okay? So just make sure when you're tracing it off that you're definitely right. I've wrote on mine, I've wrote top. So it's really, really clear to see that's exactly what I need to put there. Then when obviously you're tracing it off again to get the back pair, make sure again that you're moving it down, just in case that again there is any design in the fabric that's going to be really obvious if you sew them together and you've done one way and one the other. Okay, so you've got your 4 skirt panels cut out here, unless obviously your fabric was wider and you've managed to cut out your back panel on the fold, in which case you'll have 1 long one and 2, so you'll have 3 altogether, 4 obviously including your waistband. So I'm going to put the waistband to the side for 1 second, but before you separate these pattern pieces, it might be an idea for you to either pop a pin or mark or double notch, which I have, the top of each panel, so that way you know that that's the top of your pattern piece, just in case when you're working on it, obviously you turn them round or something like that, you know that you're sewing the right sections to each other. So using your pattern piece from your Cici pattern set, you will have, you'll see that there's a button stand guide there, and that's going to give you the measurement for the interfacing that needs to go on 2 of your edges. So if you imagine the fronts coming together, so you've got 2 panels, you're going to want to interface 1 edge here and 1 edge here using the width that's on your button stand piece of your pattern. Once you've done that, you can also then interface your waistband as well. So fully interface that, and then you can press that in half. Right, so we've now got your interface waistband, which I have now just folded in half and pressed. You also have your interfaced button stands as well. So I've done both sides, so as I explained earlier, so you have your 2 front pieces, so when they're turned back. So the next step is to sew these together. Now what we need to be doing is sewing these together in a long strip, ensuring that these 2 stay open, so these are your center front ones. So making sure that you keep your tops at the top, you're going to take your next panel and sew those down the side. Now use your centimetre seam allowance for each panel. So if you sew those together, then you'll obviously then take your next one, so the next panel, so making sure you're down that same. So what you've got there is 2 side seams and 1 back seam. So we've got all of your panels sewn together there. So we're using your 1 centimetre seam allowance, and you have your 2 centre front sections on both ends. So you've got 1 this end and 1 that end. Now what you want to do is stop the fabric from fraying. We're going to overlock down those seams. So first of all down the side seams, and then what you can do is you can go down the side with the interfacing, go all the way along the bottom, and then you can go up the other side. So the only section that you're leaving that then isn't overlocked will be the top of the waist. So I've pressed my side seams and my back seam. I've pressed back my button stand. I did actually, even though we've overlocked it, I did actually tuck that in. So I've pressed that all back. I've also pressed back the hem, and then I've tucked in the overlocking on there as well, okay? Now, you don't have to sew down the button stand because it will stay in place. But as I'm here anyway, I'm actually going to sew down that to the edge of my seam allowance. To the edge of my button stand, and then I'm going to continue all the way around the bottom to do my hem, and then I'm going to come up the other side. So we have our nice neat hems now. So we've got our length hemmed, and we've also got our button stands hemmed. So the next step is to add your gathering stitch for the waist. Now I suggest that you do this for each section so you don't go across the seams. It does make it difficult to pull in. Now I generally tend to do at least 2 lines of gather stitch. You don't need to go through the button stand, okay? So you can start just beyond the button stand. So making sure that within your seam allowance you need to do 2 long stitches, long length stitch lines all the way along right until that side seam. Then you can come off and you can start again. Now the best thing to do here is I would probably suggest that you back stitch one end and then you make sure you don't the other, so that you can pull that along. It won't come off the edge, but you can create that gather. Otherwise, if you backstitch both ends, you won't be able to pull your top thread. Okay, now this I find the easiest way. So I've done my gathering stitches. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to find the center of the waistband and just mark it on the raw edge, not the overlocked edge. So I'm just going to do a little notch there with my snips. I'm then going to fold the edge over so I can find the quarters as well, and just give those a little notch. Now this is the edge of fabric that we're going to be sewing next, so not the overlocked edge, okay? So to make sure we get the right amount of gathering in our skirt, this is a really simple process. What we're going to do is you're going to find the top middle of your skirt. So in my case, there's already a seam. You may well have that on a fold. So find that and then pin it to where the notch is on your waistband. I am then going to do the same with my quarter points. So again, I've already got seams there, so you should have those even if you don't have a seam down your center back. So that should make that nice and easy. And then I'm going to pin those. So making sure you do both sides. And then when it comes to the front, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my waistband and I'm going to overlap it by my seam allowance. So in which case, so what I've got allowed on my waistband, which is 1 centimetre. So I'm going to overlap that by 1 centimetre and pin that in place. And again, I'm going to do exactly the same on both sides. Once you do that, you're going to have your waistband here that's going to obviously be smaller than the section that you've got pinned. So you're going to have a much bigger section in there. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the top stitch of your gathering stitch, and you're just going to start pulling those to create a nice gather across the top of that particular skirt piece. This is a really simple and easy way to do it, because you know then that the skirt's going to be really even because you've done it in quarters. So it just takes the stress out of making sure that you've evened up the entire skirt. You don't have to gather the whole thing in one go. So I do really recommend doing it this way for your own sanity. So as you can see already, we've managed to quickly gather that into that section. Obviously you want to have a little play of it, just make sure it's nice and even. And then you can carry on to do that on the other sections as well until you've done all 3 or 4 sections. Once you've gathered your sections in between and you have them nice and even, you can sew along there with your centimetre seam allowance like I have done here. And then what you can see there, just obviously make sure you remember to take any of your pins out. And then what you've got then is you can start to see your skirt coming together. You can see you've got that lovely gathered waist. Okay, so the next thing you need to be doing is where you've got your waistband you're going to take them together, so they're right sides together, and you're going to sew down 1 centimetre down each end. So once you've sewn your ends, so that's all nice and pressed and in place, you can then start to turn up your overlocked edge of the inside of your waistband. Now I've just started pinning at the quarters and then popping one in between. Now the reason why you want to pin this in place is because you're going to be sewing it from the other side, which is what we call stitch in the ditch. So it's important that when you're pinning this, you're making sure that this slightly overlaps where your stitch line is from sewing your gathered skirt to the outside of your waistband. Just be really careful that you're keeping all your gathered layers down, so nothing's getting caught up in your waistband, so you don't end up with any pleats or puckers or anything like that. Work your way across until trimming off any little extra cottons you might have. Now if you want to add a couple of extra pins in between those, then absolutely do. It's much better to overpin than it is to have to unpick it. So I say, if you're again a little bit worried about not quite catching that in, put some extra pins in there. Okay, so once you've come all the way to the end, you're going to turn over and you're actually going to be sewing, so making sure that's all nice and neat there too. You're actually going to be sewing from the other side. And as I said, this is a method called stitch in the ditch. So where your waistband meets your skirt, you're going to be aiming to get your stitch line right in the fold of that section. It is a little bit tricky, so take your time, and the closest you can get it, the better. Bearing in mind obviously that you've already placed that so that it is slightly overlapping. So then what you'll end up with is a stitch along here that keeps the waistband down and looks nice and neat from the inside too. Once you've done your buttonhole and then you've found yourself a nice button, in this case I've gone for a plain black one, your skirt, your Cici skirt, is now complete. So this is what this looks like finished. It's so cute. I've made the Cici bikini in black to go underneath it.